So I have a set of questions, a few general questions for everyone, and then a few specific questions for each of you, which I will put to you in turn. First, let me get to the general question. So the first one that I have is about what I regard as the difference between the Friday evening view of accessibility versus the Monday morning view of accessibility. And what I mean by that is that a lot of employers in the legal profession, clients, etc., when asked in the abstract if they are open to having a lawyer with a disability work for them, will embrace the idea and extol the virtues of diversity. But when it comes to the cut and thrust of everyday work and being able to produce deliverables within the required time span, people have a low tolerance level, and their patience begins to run out, because of which a lot of lawyers with disabilities are unable to realize their full potential. How, according to you, can this challenge be countered? Who would like to go first?
I can go first, Rahul.
Sure.
This is Laura. Um, so I think part of the problem is that, and I loved what Carol, when you phrased it that way, that the burden of proof is always on the person with the disability, I was like, oh my goodness, I've been struggling to put that into words forever. So thank you. But I think part of the problem actually is that you're expected to be the expert at everything and to have a solution for all of the things that can come up along the way, even though you have never experienced the situation before or perhaps had to interact with the technology um, yourself. And that has happened to me numerous times where it'll be a task. I'm still a new lawyer. They'll be like, you have to do this. And I'm like, well, what does that entail? And as they begin explaining, I'm like, oh, man, I need to do some research and think about how I will do this as a person who is blind, and there's no one at the firm or at the wherever I am who has any ideas because they haven't done any accessibility research whatsoever. Again, I can only offer my own thoughts. One of the things that I have found is very helpful, especially if you have lead time when you're beginning your job, is to make it very clear from the beginning that you are not I mean, even if this is the case, I think it's a valid thing to say, that you are only an expert in being a lawyer. You are not, do not have a degree in accessibility. You don't have a degree in assistive technology. You don't have a degree in any of these other specialized areas. And so it is not uh, a valid approach to ask me to have the solution to all of these problems. And so, like, one of the things that I say when I begin a job is that it's very important. I understand if you have never had a blind person before, but it's very important in this time leading up to me onboarding that your IT staff educate itself about the technology I use, because I'm not going to be available to do that, or for the people that you're working with, that it's important for HR to be doing some of the educating here on accessibility. Um, that's I've had varying degrees of success with that, but I think that the most important part is making it very clear up front that I am not I'm not an expert. And to give one example, and again, I recognize that this is this strategy isn't for everyone, and that it can be a little risky, and there are certain freedoms that I have in terms of, like, where I feel that I'm able to take greater risks. But to give it an example of this, I found out suddenly that the place that I was working at the time had a required training. It was a required trial advocacy training. And I was sent this, like, binder of printed materials. And I was like, you need to book a plane ticket and go to this place where the training is. And I refused. I just said, I'm not participating in this training. No one has done any work to make this accessible, or to do trial exhibits, or to do document presentation in a way that I would ever do. And if I participate in this training, it will just be me trying to, like, muddle through to get through the week. to do things your way, and that's not how I would do it as a blind lawyer. It's a waste of my time, and I'm not doing it. And it was, again, it was like, not the most comfortable thing in the world to do, but I didn't do the training. And I was like, well, try again when you take my needs seriously. And they came back and said, well, what do you need as a trial lawyer? And I said, I don't know. I'm part of the reason that I'm a new lawyer is that I'm figuring out what I need as a trial lawyer. And so like, you can't just send me an agenda and say, these are the things that we're going to be covering. You figure it out with a week in advance. So anyway, I guess that's not really a great answer to your question, except to say that like my default position is always to, even if you are faking it till you make it with that confidence, which I have done many, 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 many times, that you come at it with this place of assertiveness and repeating ad nauseum as much as you can that these are issues that cannot be fully placed on the shoulders of the person with the disability to solve, because we are just human beings who have disabilities. We do not have all of these expert credentials that people assume that we have.
Hi,
It's David. Would you like me to follow up?
of course.
Okay. Laura has provided a superb description of how these things can arise and some of the horrible positions you could be put in if they do arise. Let me just offer a few other thoughts. The first is that when these kind of things happen, whether it's a technical breakdown or whatever, it's important to be ready to put it back in a context, which is, it's true, some people may assume that this is all, disability related for us. Some may assume that. And I'm quick to try to turn that around and say, anybody else ever had a computer problem? Or anybody else ever had materials delivered when you don't have time to read them? And of course, everybody else has. Everybody's had it. So I then framed the problem we have in terms that it's actually the problem everybody else has had in some form or other, to try to at least get them to understand us in that context, that it's not, oh my God, if you hire blind people, this is what will happen or whatever. And I've been fortunate that that's been reasonably successful. The second strategy is, and this is not a total answer to the concerns that Laura raised, but I always believe in building redundancy in backups. So for example, the standard operating procedure in governments and private sectors, they give you a computer and then after 3 years, they replace it, you give back your old computer. Well, I have built in an insistence that I keep my old computer. And I keep it loaded with as much of my data as I can, whether it's shared via Dropbox or whatever, because I know that for a person who is sighted, if their computer goes down, they could just go use the next computer at the next workstation. We can't. So I need to be able to always either reach into a drawer or slide over to the next laptop over, which is my old clunker from 4 years ago, but it still works. I actually had a case where I was in the Supreme Court of Canada and my computer was particularly giving me trouble. So I made a point of bringing my redundant computer to court. And my laptop, my current one, actually crashed on me about 10 minutes before I was going to argue while somebody else was arguing. So I had a momentary gasp, and then I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the backup computer, booted it, and went on. And the third and final thing I'm going to suggest, which is not at all responsive to what Laura was saying and maybe not responsive to your question, but heck, let me try it anyway. We also have to be ready to push our envelopes, which we do all the time, in a way that helps change the channel on what you're talking about. And I've been very fortunate in my career. My office was very supportive of my work, but perhaps the best illustration of it is that the last case I ever argued in the Supreme Court of Canada before I retired, and in another case, the last case I argued in the Ontario Court of Appeal, were both eyewitness identification evidence appeals. Now, let me say that again. They were both eyewitness identification evidence appeals. Now, if you had asked me way at the start of my career, if there's one kind of case that I probably couldn't argue, it would be an eyewitness identification case. But I figured a way around it And it worked. And I think, yeah, we were successful in both appeals as I think about it. And so I had to overcome my own sense of, hey, maybe this is something which wouldn't work. And it did. So anyway, back to you.
Actually, Rahul, can I just quickly follow up with one thing?
Yes, please.
I just want to say, so David, yeah, I could not agree with you more. This is actually something in terms of reframing things, in terms of what things that people understand. One of, I was a partner at my law firm. I was desperately trying to explain to him what it's like when my screen reader crashes, and these problems I was experiencing with JAWS not getting along with another program, a proprietary program, and the partner just goes, "You're basically saying it's the blue screen of death." Which, if you don't know, is like, when your computer totally freezes and it's a blue screen, and it's basically telling you like you can't do anything here. And I was like, yes, that's exactly it, right? And
Yeah.
it was what he understood then, how the lack of control you feel, and how there's nothing actually that you can do to fix it. And there's also nothing that you did to cause it. So
Yeah.
I just really, I want to reemphasize that that's such a great tactic, and the redundancy as well. My version of this is I actually recently testified at the Senate, the United States Senate, in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and like David, I've always learned to bring backups. And the exact same thing happened, actually. I was planning on pairing my cell phone with my Braille display to read my remarks, and for reasons that defy any understanding, for some strange reason, it did not work. And so I was a little bit panicking, but I was able to pull out my laptop, which was my backup. It looked a little less suave, maybe, but I paired the display to the laptop and was able to go. And so I think that kind of redundancy, and that ability to think on your feet and to have a backup to your backup is so incredibly important. And it also it projects this image of preparedness and self-confidence, that you are ready to take on whatever is thrown at you.
I'm just going to add, if I don't want us to monopolize this, but I'm going to jump in because Laura and I have never met, but I feel like we've known each other forever just through this exchange. But just two quick thoughts. One of which is we're kind of bookends, because Laura's early in her career, and I retired at after years of my career. And the longer you're in the office and more established, the more these things roll off a lot easier. When you're initially starting out, every junior counsel feels vulnerable, whether they're visually impaired or not, have a disability or not. I'm not diminishing what she's saying at all, much to the contrary, I'm reinforcing it. But Laura, but initially we feel very vulnerable when these things happen, and we buck up and we handle them. And over time, as we get more and more established, we're able to ultimately shrug them off with greater ease. You're getting there. You're going to get there. It's part of the complete unfairness of the senior counsel, junior counsel reality of our world. The other thing which may help folks watching our session today is a good friend of mine once saw me working, not in a law context, but in another context, in trying to sort of get folks adapted to working with someone with vision loss. And he said to me, you folks are like somebody doing a slow dance, the old dancing like with one partner, and because one person leads. And he said, David, it turns out that you have to lead, but you have to make sure the other person doesn't know they're being led. It has to be that natural. And in a sense, the strategies that Laura's talking about is exactly that, which is trying to lead folks, make them feel comfortable with us without hanging up a big flashing neon sign saying, I'm leading you. And that strategy works, except when you get to the calamity, like being invited to take part in a trial ad course with a pile of materials you can't read like tomorrow. And at that point, you got to resort to other strategies like she did. Back to you.
Yeah. No, I think the one thing that resonated particularly with me was the insight about, and I guess this comes through in both Laura and David's initial responses about being assertive and recognizing that it's not about you. Because for me, it can often happen that if one is not able to get work done within the stipulated time frame, or if you think that something takes you longer, there's a tendency to weaponize that to feel bad about yourself or to feel inferior, and a sense of guilt that something must be wrong with how you are doing things, that has resulted in things being that way. So kind of reframing it to recognize that that is just a function of the structural reality of being a blind lawyer in an able-bodied sighted world is, I think, a really powerful insight, and one that we would do well to remember when things get difficult. So one question that then I had for all of you is what, and some of this you've spoken to in response to the previous question, but what inhibitions or insecurities do you still have, if you don't mind sharing, as a lawyer with a disability in the profession?
I can go first again.
Yeah,
So
sure.
again, Carol, I felt so validated by your remarks because I also I'm not muted, right?
No, no, I can hear
No,
you.
I
Okay.
can.
I also struggle very much with imposter syndrome that is related to my disability. I really do still think like, oh, maybe the work I'm producing isn't actually that great and they don't know what to do. They're holding me to different standards, all the classic things
Mm.
that come along with imposter syndrome. I don't know that I will ever actually totally get over that, but I think like the my way of combating that, or my way of like helping myself to remember that I can't possibly be evaluating myself correctly, is to realize that again, like we actually have a luxury in this way, some of the ones of us who don't work, who work in the private sector, in the sense that um, people are really paying us to give them the best possible representation that they can get. And there is no room, like people are not going to put money on the line for quote unquote pity or lower quality work. So whether it's like you have your own law practice and you know that clients are literally coming to you and saying, I want you to represent me, or for me as a junior attorney, it's more like a partner coming and saying, I want you to work on this case for me. Like they can't actually do that if they don't think that you're up to the task. And for me, that has been something, even though I do still struggle with it, that has been very liberating. That to just to realize that, you know, um, like uh, for better or worse, people are going to be they are going to be concerned about the profit margin or the satisfaction of their clients, and they're going to only ask you if they think you can really do it. So I think for me, that's my biggest insecurity. I also, the other thing that I will say, and I don't know if people can speak to this, is there are times when I make a decision in the in the spur of the moment, and this goes to the lead versus lead without knowing, showing them that you're leading. There have been times in my career where somebody will offer to do something for me, or to sort of, lead, like do something for me that in my normal everyday interactions I would politely decline, or I would say, no, thank you. I'm capable of doing that myself. And I get a little nervous sometimes that if I'm too assertive in that way, especially with a client or with a very senior partner, that I will be seen as the sort of the angry disabled person or the ungrateful disabled person. So there have been times in my life where I have allowed the person to do something for me for the sake of seeming amenable that I normally wouldn't do. And that is a huge struggle for me, because I am constantly second guessing, was that the right decision? Did I end up seeming less competent because I allowed them to show me where the chair is, or whatever it might be in your situation? Or did I do the right thing in the sense that the conversation was able to continue to be about the work and not about whether this person can pour a glass of water? And I don't know the solution to that, but it is something that I definitely still continue to struggle with.
It's David. Here's my perspective on this. On the one hand, if you watched me in a courtroom or a classroom or in a TV interview, I will seem like the peak of self-confidence. And in some senses, that's not, I do have a comfort level doing those things. On the other hand, I am keenly aware that you're only as good as your last argument, and you're only as good as your last class you taught, and you're only as good as your last interview you gave. You could have 40 years of doing it well, but you go in and make a fool of yourself by doing a really terrible job, and that's what people may well remember. So I will undergo the same process of self-questioning and self-challenging that Laura talks about, because I want to make sure, no matter how comfortable or seemingly self-confident I am standing up to argue a case or getting up to teach a class or picking up the phone to give a radio interview, I still want to deliver the quality that my last one was if it was good, and not blow my track record if it's a good track record. So I go through that self-doubt, self-questioning constantly, and then after I'm done, I will re-look at an interview I gave and give myself a once-over. When I'd finish arguing a case, I'd turn to my student, either over a beer or a coffee or whatever, and say, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? What could I have done better? And they look at me like, you're expecting me to criticize you? But I actually want to, because I think it's good for us all to learn from it. This is going to sound nauseatingly cliche, but I tell law students that we call it practicing law for a reason. We are practicing up to the day we retire, and the point in time when you think that you know it all and that you're not practicing anymore is the time that your arrogance means you've got to get out of the business because you're going to mess up. So I actually think that all of this sort of theme that we're talking about is a very positive, constructive thing. And again, it's not, we will focus on some of the disability related stuff for understandable reasons, but people without disabilities who are in the law profession are either doing it or their arrogance is precluding them from improving. Back to you.
Right. Thanks, David. My last sort of general question is for Carol, because she's not answered any, she not had the opportunity to participate in this segment of the conversation. Carol, would you mind telling us who your role models in the legal profession are, and if there's any advice that you have for a young person considering, with a disability, considering a profession in the law?
Well, I'm very fortunate.
All of you, just a minute. I would like to bring to your notice that Mr. Rumta has joined us and he's presently in the meet. So we can continue with the question also, but just I wanted this to bring to your notice.
All right, so let Carol answer this question, and then we'll ask Mr. Rumta to share his remarks with us before turning to one or two audience questions at the end.
Yes, surely.
All right.
Okay, so I mentioned that certainly 20 years ago when I sustained my injury, there weren't role models for me to look to. I am fortunate now that through the Queensland Law Society, I became a founding member of something called the QLS Diverse Abilities Network. And it's a group of lawyers that have disability and diversity issues that have set ourselves the task of welcoming other lawyers that may be student lawyers about to graduate, or young lawyers in the early years of their career, or any level of your career, where we might be able to be of assistance to make your journey into the legal profession a more enjoyable one. So I've met some incredible lawyers through that. And one of the things, I was going to jump in earlier, but David was too quick for me. I wanted to just mention that one of the things we did from an employment point of view was we collectively put together an accessibility guide for employers, particularly large top-tier law firms, for all these things, Laura, that you're talking about, and David, that you mentioned. Very often when people don't know what to do, they do nothing. So it is part of this education to help make your life easier, instead of having to lead them, as you spoke to, Laura and David, that there's some sort of guidance given to these top tier law firms that, look, these are the issues that you need to consider when you're employing someone with a disability, and also mention the plus sides as well, as to all the benefits as well of, it's not just making accommodations here, there, and whatever. But I guess my I have many people that I've met through this, but there are two that stand out for me. One of them is a wonderful young blind lawyer that is a litigator, and she is a real firecracker, and I'm very, very pleased to know her, and she's certainly someone that that gives me inspiration. And the other one is a gentleman that became a quadriplegic whilst studying medicine, and yet he went on to finish his medical degree, and being the show off and being the overachiever that he is, he went on to also change gear and finish his law degree. So he's not only, as I said to him, most mums want their kids to grow up as doctors or lawyers, and of course you have to be the overachiever and achieve both. He is actually Queensland's Australian of the Year this year, and he would be probably one of the many role models that I look to now.